In the 1980s, the Danish government, their Ministry of Education, decided to, they were frustrated with the direction of sociology in Denmark, specifically at Copenhagen University. They appointed an external Nordic, Swedish, Finnish, Norwegian, established empirical sociologists with international reputations to review, take a look at the department, and they end up decided that this is way too far gone. It's become this sort of Marxist hotbed of non-empirical speculative esoteric theorizing. And of course, the government was worried about training people who could analyze social data, Danish welfare state. There's a lot of these type of things that you need to have people who understand this. So they end up dismantling the sociology department for a couple of years and rebuilding it from scratch in the early 90s. And look, just fast forward to present day, it's one of the most impressive sociology departments that I can think of.
Jukka Savolainen, welcome to Heterodox Out Loud.
Thanks for having me.
It's really a pleasure to have you here. I think you and I met a year ago at Chicago at the HXA conference in Chicago.
That's right.
And you also, of course, are the leader of our online disciplinary community, HX Sociology. We'll be talking a lot about that. I wonder if you could just begin by just introducing yourself to our audience. You're a sociologist. You're born in Finland. I don't know much more than that. Maybe you were born a sociologist in Finland. Can you tell us something about how you came to be where you are now and your story?
Yeah, I wasn't quite born a sociologist, but I was pretty early adopter in a sense that my dad is an attorney, now so retired, but he had a lot of sociology friends. And I guess he worked for, maybe he was in the board of the Finnish equivalent of the Census Bureau, Statistics Finland, and he would bring in all these kind of charts and graphs. And I was really fascinated from an early age that you could study people's, opinions and happiness and their standard of living and those type of things. So I really was always kind of introduced early to that. So when I did end up taking summer university courses when I was still in high school and in anthropology and sociology. I ended up majoring in sociology at Helsinki University and ended up moving all the way to the Ph.D. So I've always been a sociologist.
You did your Ph.D. in Finland?
No, I did it in State University of New York, Albany, New York. Yeah. So actually kind of related to our theme here. I basically, I was on track of doing a PhD in Finland and doing kind of medical sociology, quantitative research on that in a good group. But ultimately I left Finland because I escaped what I would consider this sort of a postmodernist turn in Finnish sociology, the sort of continental French theory and the kind of stuff that I don't know if you're familiar with Alan Sokal's hoax, where
of course.
That I think he dubbed it fashionable nonsense. So I escaped for America, honestly, to do a PhD in sociology that was more empirically grounded and quantitative and believed in things like objective science and even theoretical progress.
And where do you teach now?
I teach now at Wayne State University. I'm in two departments in criminology and sociology.
I want to go back a bit to what you were saying. The young Jukka, when you were first looking at the charts and things your father was bringing home. Can you just tell us a bit about what sociology is? What are the main questions that sociology asks? What are the methods they use? Describe to us what a well-functioning sociological discipline might look like, because, as you know, we're going to be talking about some of the malfunction.
Yeah.
But more important, we're going to be talking about some of the work that you've been doing and others have been doing to reform sociology. But let's just begin with the Platonic form of sociology. What is sociology and why is it important?
Yeah. So probably would differ based on currently practicing sociology. You might get a different answers, which is already kind of an indication of specialty of sociology. It's that it's a very non-paradigmatic, that there's a lot of stuff goes on under sociology. But you're asking me, so
you're saying there's different methods that are thought of.
There are different, epistemologies, I would imagine, and so on right now. So sociology is notoriously fragmented, I guess I would say. But if you're asking me, So why I always stuck with sociology, I actually looked into all kinds of different majors. Even I was a little bit frustrated with sociology. I looked into economic history and social history. I was very interested in philosophy, but I wanted to do something, I guess, empirical. I still love philosophy and social psychology, those type of things. But I think the sociology to me is, I guess it was integrative general social science that is supposed to look at big questions. I give you an example. You may be, many listeners may be familiar with Joseph Hendricks, Weirdest People in the World, this argument about weird. I teach his book in my sociology theory seminar because to me, that's a perfect example of what my vision of sociology would be. He's actually in some ways very Weberian. Max Weber is a preeminent classic of sociology, although he himself, of course, wasn't trained in sociology, but his Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism is a cultural explanation of emergence of this economic system in certain region of Europe. And Hendricks' explanation is of how sort of Western mentality and Western mindset and institutions evolved in a particular type of environment by a different typical kind of processes. And he uses anthropological data, he uses behavioral economical experiments, he uses historical archival record survey data, and he asks these big questions using. So to me, that it captures what I think sociology should be a lot of the time, but I don't think it's like that so much in these days.
So let's talk a bit about that. What's sociology like these days? You said I've heard you say a couple of things. I've heard you say that sociology in its ideal form, perhaps, is capable of studying big questions about the nature of human social interaction. It is the study of society, most generally, literally. But you're also saying that it's a discipline that is very fractured in terms of the different methodologies it uses. That could be a productive thing if you have some economic tools and some historical tools and some philosophical tools. You could bring that together to understand the human condition, for example. But let's talk about sociology as practiced today. What's it like as a field?
Yeah, so I would say that the issue that I have with sociology, among many things, is that it's more or less openly. I would almost say that as follows: whether you are critical of a present-day sociologist or you're sympathetic to it, both sides would agree that there's a lot of ideological or political bias. The first camp would say it's a bad thing because we ought to be a science of social life. The other half would say it's a good thing because we're supposed to be advancing what Christian Smith, a Notre Dame sociologist, describes as the sacred project of American sociology, which he wrote a book about it. And this is a preeminent, very meritorious sociologist, Christian Smith. In 2014, he wrote this book where he basically describes that the mainstream of American sociology is a kind of a political activist project of the left-wing persuasion, obviously, that masks itself as a neutral science.
And was that a critique of sociology, or was he saying that the masking is appropriate?
Right. I think it was. Most people would look at it as a critique of sociology. He's incidentally he's a sociologist of religion, so he's probably more trying to be neutral about it, and just understanding and maybe arguing that we ought to be honest about it and own it if that's what we want to do. But no, he's critical of that. He definitely was suggesting we ought to be return to a more neutral and scientific approach.
I don't know that book.
Okay,
so forgive me, but help me a little bit then with the ideas. Was he saying that there was a lack of viewpoint diversity within sociology? Is that central to the thesis?
Absolutely.
When we track viewpoint diversity on the dimension of ideology, we find that sociology is one of the disciplines that is most imbalanced between people who identify politically left and politically right. At HXA, of course, we care about viewpoint diversity on a variety of dimensions, but that dimension of ideology is a very important one to us. And sociology, from our studies at least, suggests that it's one of the most extremely unbalanced fields.
Sure.
So in that context, what do you see about viewpoint diversity? What do you see about viewpoint diversity in sociology? How does it affect the study of society?
Yeah. Well, it creates taboos, topics that you are not allowed to touch, or you are supposed to talk about certain things only from a certain perspective. There's a recent article by two excellent heterodox sociologists, also members of Heterodox Academy, John Iceland and Eric Silver from Penn State University, where they point out how the research on inequality, especially racial inequality, is entirely dominated by this sort of systemic racism type of perspective, or sort of a critical race theory approach, that you cannot consider other factors that might explain these outcomes, like just pure class differences, educational attainment, and those type of things. You cannot consider cultural differences in socialization, which in other fields are pretty okay.
Kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Rather ironic that one couldn't use class analysis
Right.
to talk about race.
Yeah, that it's all about the kind of a sort of white supremacy type of things. I would say overall that sociology, when I arrived in graduate school, there were more vibrant discussions about, like, even I think it was in the 70s, but William Julius Wilson had the Declining Significance of Race book, and that became a little bit, fell out of favor, but his later research looked at the dynamics of deindustrialization and family disruption as causes of the sort of underclass formations. These type of topics are now sort of taboo, or even like criminology or crime, which is my area. You don't see serious efforts to explain these days in sociological literatures why is there so much violence lethal violence, for example, happening in this country in poor communities. How to address it. Instead, the focus has shifted into how bad the police are, how terrible the criminal justice system is, and so on. So it's become much more of this sort of social justice advocacy kind of discipline rather. Mm-hmm.
And can you say something about? I want to hear. I'd love to talk with you about your experience running HX Sociology.
Mm-hmm.
How did you first find about Heterodox Academy? When did you join? And how did that lead you toward taking the lead? You're the leader, I think, of that community.
Yeah, I get the term is moderator, although I like leader. Maybe the supreme leader. We can work on that, but I think it's the moderator of the.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck leading our heterodox people.
So,
But just tell us a bit about how you came to Heterodox Academy, and then also tell us about that community.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have. I'm not sure how old Heterodox Academy is, but I think I joined.
We'll be 10 years old this summer.
Oh yeah, so I've been definitely part of it from the jump. I've been to all the meetings, the first two in New York and then Denver, and this one. So I'm a, and obviously because I care about these things, it probably speaks
Thank you.
Probably speaks to my interest. As I mentioned, I was interested in philosophy, particularly philosophy of science, and so I very much appreciate the importance of the norms of research and such. So these are things I care about. So yeah, I've been a kind of a hardcore member for a long time.
And what about HX Sociology? When did that start? How did it start? I should just say to our listeners that Heterodox Academy sponsors. We have members all over the world. We sponsor campus-based communities. 74 of those now in the U.S., Canada, and in England. And we also sponsor a series of online virtual communities, some based on geography, like HX Sweden, HX New Zealand, HX Far East, HX New York, interestingly, HX Canada. But we also have disciplinary communities, and HX Sociology is one of those in that category. Can you say a bit about, were you there for the formation of HX Sociology? How did you get involved?
Not as such. I think I've known about it, but I think had been dormant for a good number of years. I was active in another community, Heterodox Academy Writers Group, which had some sociologists.
The HX Writers Group.
Yeah. And but one reason why I probably decided to step in as a moderator, I think I was asked by a member of HXA, and I agreed to jump into that leadership role because I think it was. Not only was it dormant, but I sensed that there was pent-up demand. I was meeting more and more sociologists were joining the organization, and there were all kinds of other synergies we can talk about that I'm not usually a leader of groups or organizational person, but I thought this was important. And so sure enough, so we have been meeting and communicating and planning things. We have about I'm told over 230 sociologists who are members, and there's a shorter mailing list that I have, about 70 plus.
Are they from all over the world? Are they mostly in North America?
Yes,
Where are they from?
they're mostly from North America, but we have someone from Italy. We have a Swedish professor from Stockholm. We have UK people. We have very active Canadian, and we have some Dutch people, and so on. So yeah, it's international, which makes it a challenge to organize the Zoom meetings.
And do people speak English?
Yes.
And how often do you meet?
Well, we probably meet. The idea is probably to meet like every other month or something like that, and we just have one meeting coming up. And then we also are meeting here in New York ahead of the main conference of Heterodox Academy. We're meeting here and having a small symposium about these issues. And we have also reserved a little session during the meeting.
That's right. As I understand, you're coming here to the Siegel Center to do a meeting of the sociologists.
That's right.
Before going to Brooklyn to our main HXA conference in June. Tell me more about the other synergies you mentioned a moment ago. You mentioned about other synergies within sociology. What were you thinking of?
Well, one important, very accidental, I guess, development, I would say, accidental in the sense it wasn't planned by any of us who were involved, is that there's a well-respected journal of sociology called Theory and Society, which was, and I have no prior involvement in this journal, but
there's some kind of scandal with that journal.
It wasn't a scandal. It was a dysfunction, I guess I would say. It was scandal in the sense of how the transition took place, but
an academic scandal.
Yeah, you could say that. Depends on the perspective. From what I understand, and I think I know the details pretty well, it was a very poorly functioning journal in terms of just the actual management, and the publisher finally got fed up with the status quo and was seeking new blood, and end up through process
because it had been the same editorial group for a very long for decades.
Decades, exactly. Yeah, and they apparently were very unresponsive. But there's a statement about it in Retraction Watch if you want to read it. The publisher was frustrated with attempts to renew the revitalize or fix the problems with the journal. So they end up, I don't know through what process, nominating two new editors, Jonathan Turner, who's a veteran of sociology, who has been criticizing the sort of activist turn in sociology. He's in favor of more scientific and the kind of sociology that I was describing earlier.
You mean like empirical
and theoretically ambitious and sort of almost like a cumulative science type of thing is what I understand his vision is, and his student Kevin McCaffrey are the new editors. And so I didn't know anything too much about this, but they asked me to join the editorial board. They asked John Iceland, Eric Silver, and Steve Pinker, lots of people,
all HXA members,
Corey Clark, all these sort of some of them are well known and members of Heterodox Academy. So it's not like a Heterodox Academy journal by any means. I think it's, last time I checked, was like 1/3 maybe were members, so that's not a requirement. But the point is that it's very open, and they already have published very interesting stuff. I want to emphasize, it's open to all kinds of contributions, but it's definitely one of those outlets. So it's a nice thing to have an enthusiastic HX sociology group, and then combine that with an actual outlet that's sympathetic to these perspectives. So that's the sort of a type of synergy that I'm talking about.
That's interesting. We often talk, the team and I, about different ways HXA can have impact.
Mm-hmm.
And we have our main work focuses on campuses and improving the campus culture. We're seeking a campus culture for open inquiry, and there's a lot more I could say about that, of course. But we often are interested as well in disciplines and how disciplines can be reformed. Can you give us any? I mean, sociology, as I said, is sort of infamous for being ideologically uniform. Do you see we described now this example of a journal,
right,
where it sounds like the impetus came from, was it Springer? Which journal group was it?
Yeah, it was Springer, yeah.
And was that, who decided to make the journal more viewpoint diverse?
It was the editors. So I think this is my interpretation, is that Jonathan Turner, they turned into him because he had published many books about sociological theory. So he had the status as a preeminent sociological theorist. So maybe he had a relationship with the publisher, I don't know. But but it sort of turned into that. Maybe because in order to pursue that type of vision of sociology, you want to have folks that happen to be also members of Heterodox Academy.
That's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And how influential is that journal within sociology?
So it really took a turn, a kind of 180 change. It was pretty established within what you would call theoretical sociology, more of a not so empirical. It was established by Alvin Gouldner, who's a kind of a legendary sociologist and who passed away. So then now it's turned into in the context of this change, the sociological mainstreams, the folks who were part of this journal, they openly were saying that we're going to boycott this journal because they didn't. And then there was a lot of vitriol directed at this new leadership, especially because they were members of Heterodox Academy, especially because they published pieces in Killat and those type of contrarian or heterodox. So that's in sociological mainstream. That means that you're a hardcore conservative, if not a fascist, if you're doing this type of stuff. So there was a lot of that type of content. So I think.
But that, can I just interrupt to say that's your we're describing the views of professional sociologists who take the view that what they're doing is in some senses political ideologically based.
Right.
So if you're not with us politically ideologically, we're going to attack you. But if you were with us ideologically, we wouldn't attack you.
Sure.
Whereas what we're trying to talk about, where we're trying to move is away from ideology to actually something like regular science, real normal science.
Right. But I would say that the norms of regular normal science, norms that paradoxically or enough were most famously formulated by American sociologist Robert K. Merton. Columbia University is famous for formulating the 4 norms of science: organized skepticism, disinterestedness, communism, and I forget the 4th one is. But basically, he's a sociologist. But if you advocate for these type of values in contemporary sociology, those are sort of questionable, maybe even right wing values.
So let me just read from the wall across from the HXA way, a set of 5 norms. Make your case with evidence. Be intellectually charitable. Be intellectually humble. Be constructive. Be yourself. Are those norms of sociology? Are those recognizable? These are work across this.
I would say that those would very much capture what's missing in mainstream American sociology, especially making the case with evidence is the issue is, and of course it's not only sociology, a lot of social sciences have the same issue, is that what I've observed and what I've written about is that evidence requirements or standards of rigor for evidence depend on what the results are. Like, for example, it's a famous case, in sociology from 2012, where Mark Regners, another member of Heterodox Academy, a full professor of sociology in the University of Texas, published a study that suggested, based on the data, that children that had been raised, in at least part of the time, in a non-heterosexual family situation, like parents had, maybe gay marriage type. This was before gay marriage, by the way. Suffered some more negative outcomes, if you will. So basically, there was a negative association between growing up with a same-sex parent and parents versus, and so of course this was controversial in sociology, and there's a whole movement trying to cancel him, trying to investigate the journal, and there was no scientific misconduct. There was a thorough investigation, but simply because the results were unappealing and contrary to the favorite narrative. And by the way, I mean, I certainly, it was a study, important topic, and I think you ought to be able to report them. But folks in sociology thought it was so harmful that they tried to suppress and punish that type of behavior.
And that's such a nice example, because so number 1 on our HXA is make your case with evidence. This is an example. I don't know the study, but from you describe, it's an example of a person discovering something about the social world.
Right.
And that fact you described, that people grown up, I'm going to change it, but children raised in same-sex families have less positive outcomes. If that is a robust fact, there's evidence for that. that raises opens all kinds of interesting
Sure.
avenues of critique, justice-based critiques. You could ask, why is that the case? What does it mean if there's no Marriage Equality Act yet?
Hmm.
Maybe that would explain.
Exactly.
So you could take that fact
Hmm.
and argue for progressive solutions. You could do it conservative ones as well. You could do it lots of different. It's just a fact.
Absolutely. So
That's why that's why make your case with evidence is a way of saying, let's talk together on the basis of a thing out there in the world that we can both hold on to.
Mhm.
It doesn't spin those conclusions any particular direction.
Mhm.
It's a fact that we can address.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's a single study. No, we shouldn't put too much with single study, kind of a one type of survey, and so there was no tolerance for just entertaining the idea that any given scholar might find with any given data set something that didn't exactly fit the narrative, and it was needed to be extinguished from the literature.
It's fascinating because obviously one could take that study and use that as a basis for the claim that there should be more support given.
Absolutely.
But so there's all kinds of ways we could go, as we said. Can you say a little bit more about HX sociology? What's your experience being part of that group? Has it? Do you see sociology as a discipline that can be helped, can be returned to a better way?
Yeah.
And can it happen from within? I want to talk to you in a few minutes about
Sure.
governmental interventions,
Mhm.
which are all in
Right.
the news these days. I know you've been involved with some of those or observed some of those. But before we talk about the governmental interventions, we'll talk about them abroad as well as in the U.S.
Yeah.
But before we do that, just say a bit more about what you see as prospects for changing the discipline as professors from the inside. What do you see?
Yeah, I think so. I was very positively surprised about the enthusiasm based on those initial meetings with the group and Heterodox Sociology group. This already proves that there's a hunger and desire and a critical mass of people who think that we have a problem and we got to do something about it. Whether or not you can do it internally, one example that I can give you is that in some people think we need new organizations. Maybe the journal that we happened upon is a new avenue for something like that. But in Germany, they actually had similar issues with sociology, and they established a kind of a rival, more scientific. I think it's called something like the Academy für Sociology or something like that. And they're trying to, I think they have something similar happen in psychology back in the day too. So yeah, can it happen? My own, I've been around for a while now, and I think we need some, shall we say, external intervention. And the example that comes to mind from my past, all the way from 1980s, that I would like to hold up as a good model potentially, is that in the 1980s, the Danish government, their Ministry of Education, decided to. They were frustrated with the direction of sociology in Denmark, specifically at Copenhagen University, which had two sociology departments at the time. When we're talking about Denmark and Copenhagen, what you have to understand is that at the time a nation of some 4 million people, and so Copenhagen is the center of learning. So what they did is that they appointed an external Nordic, Swedish, Finnish, Norwegian, established empirical sociologists with international reputations to review, take a look at the department, and they end up decided that this is way too far gone. It's become this sort of Marxist hotbed of non-empirical, speculative, esoteric theorizing, and of course, the government was worried about training people who could analyze social data. Danish welfare state. There's a lot of these type of things that you need to have people who understand this. So they end up dismantling the sociology department for a couple of years and rebuilding it from scratch in the early 90s. And look, just fast forward to present day, it's one of the most impressive sociology departments that I can think of.
That's fascinating. So let me take some of those pieces apart to be sure I understand what happened. So there were two departments in sociology in Copenhagen that have been, let's say, captured by a particular ideology.
Good term, yeah.
An ideology that is sort of infamously not evidence-based. It has a certain self-replicating way of, done badly, certainly Marxism can lead to this self-replicating cycle where everything proves itself without any kind of possibility of external impingement coming in to change the direction of the conclusions. And what interests me there is that two things. One is that the government cared enough to get involved I want to know about how that happened, because we're seeing in the U.S. the government now caring, if that's the right word, very much about to get involved. But then they also, it seems that they made a decision to get other experts in sociology to conduct the reviews. There wasn't just politicians taking it upon themselves to go in with a 2x4 and smash the place up. Rather, they got some experts together. And do you know how close to that are you, or do you know what happened? It was the 80s, I know.
Right.
But did the government, did that board hire new people? They put those departments into receivership? What?
Yeah. So I don't. Yeah, this is something that I've. There's an.
The history.
I don't know the history in detail. I suspect it was definitely a sort of centrist, right, conservative government in Denmark at the time, which of course centrist government in Denmark means like it's somewhere in the left side of the Democratic Party. But nevertheless, I'm sure there had been myriads of complaints about this sort of a neglect of scientific integrity in this area, and of course, it's part of the Nordic, so I think it was just a known thing, and I think there was a genuine concern, as I indicated, that this is a waste of resources, and this could be an important thing. And sure enough, Denmark does have a very good social science tradition. So they were worried probably about that. I don't know how they decided, but I think it's legitimacy of having this sort of like part of the Nordic family. Some of them were based in America. Some of I think one of the academics, but I think they chose people who were represent the type of. So there was this the government chose, of course, people who represented the type of sociology that they. I think one of them was recently passed away, a Swedish sociology. I'm going to say Heikki Varis, a Finnish name, does this sort of welfare state research, and so on. So definitely not right-wing sociologists, but some sociologists who I think cared about concrete social science research,
right.
And I don't know too much about the hiring, but it's they gradually built it, and like I said, there are some very very excellent. I can tell you that this right now. There's a Christopher Carlson is a professor there, and I like him for a lot of reasons. He's won a lot of awards for methodological innovations, but he's also an editor of one hopeful sign in sociology. There's a journal called Sociological Science, and they are in the avant-garde of adhering to the open science principles of reproducibility and transparency and those type of things, which is very rare in sociology. So anyway, so that's a little side point, but that's as far as I know is what happened in Copenhagen by and large.
And it's interesting because you said that, as I understood you, that the government was concerned about those departments producing students with an education that could be useful to society and to themselves.
Absolutely.
And I also just want to mention that process of there being external experts evaluating the department, that's very familiar to me. I've been taught in the U.S. for most of my life. Every 5 years or so, we would have, in different departments I was parts of, we'd have external examiners come in, external reviewers. They'd come in, they'd spend a few days talking to people. They would do some polling about research reputations of the people in the department. Then they'd read a report, which would go to the administration. And the administration would typically choose half of the external examiners, and the department would choose half. But they all had to be from high-powered departments and well-respected people. So that kind of a process of departmental review, it goes on regularly, just in normal academic life. I think people often don't realize that. We often think that departments are just completely self-governing, do whatever they want to do, because so many of them do go bad. But there's this kind of interesting, already existing structure that with some tweaking perhaps could be made a bit more muscular, be made a bit more effective, could be made, there could be some work done to the selection procedure, the people doing the evaluating to actually maybe ask them questions like, do this department encourage people to make case for their evidence? Do they encourage intellectual humility? We can imagine a variety of ways in which you described happening in the 80s could happen in contemporary universities widely.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lesson from this, the Copenhagen or the Danish model, in the sense that, there's a lot of talk about these days about this sort of tension between government intervention and the academic freedom, and I would argue that obviously, in a technical way, the Danish model, the Danish government violated, I guess, academic freedom in a sense that they unilaterally nominated, chosen experts who adhere to this sort of a vision of sort of more concrete and practical and empirical sociology. So they could have chosen some other experts, right, who would have probably said, "Oh, they're doing great there with the post-Marxist theorizing type of thing." So there was this government intervention with a certain perspective, but I would argue that it's justified, and even in our contemporary situation, it's justified when there's sustained evidence of violating the mandate, violating the norms of good science. And actually, I want to give you, if you have time, I'll give you an example of
Please.
of how the American sociological. So for listeners, I don't think we covered this yet, but the state of Florida.
I want to ask you about Florida.
Yeah, the state of Florida decided to it was a year or two ago to remove sociology, the intro sociology course. It was called Principles of Sociology.
I think it was 3 years ago.
Okay, yeah, 3. Remove from the general studies curriculum, which means that that sociology was no longer eligible for for students who need to satisfy the social science general studies requirements. Sociology was no longer eligible.
It was no longer required. So you no longer had to take sociology.
No, it was more than it was. So you're required to do some number of credits in social sciences, right? And sociology was one of the options. But now sociology was no longer even an option. So you cannot, cannot get the exposure.
So it wouldn't count. You can take a sociology course if you want, but
absolutely,
it won't count.
Absolutely.
Which means, in effect, that a lot fewer students will take sociology.
Huge margin. So
the state legislature did that in Florida. It wasn't part of the stock woke act, I remember. It happened a little bit before.
Yeah.
But it was part of the same political moment.
Absolutely.
When the government was saying what's going on, and they chose sociology. It's just interesting to me. Like how do they zero in on sociology to remove that one?
Absolutely. Well, that should say something. If you want to choose the sort of the quote unquote the wokest discipline, why did they zero in on sociology? And often sociologists kind of reacted to that, kind of flattering themselves because we're so dangerous and edgy and radical that they can't handle us. But I think so. What the rationale was that the education commissioner of Florida at the time, maybe still Manny Diaz, said something to the effect that sociology has been hijacked by left-wing radicals and so on. So what I was going to say is that American Sociological Association, of course, responded as they should have to this challenge, and of course denied and said we are a pure science of social life, interested in causes and consequences of all kinds of and relevant to fields like agriculture and finance and healthcare. That's my direct quotes from the. And then when you fast forward 9 months later, it's August 2024, and it's the American Sociological Association annual meeting. And the whole theme is something about intersectional solidarities and there's liberatory praxis, and how the president of the society explained the theme and said how this is all about how we need to engage in social activism, social reform. And so on the one hand, when people are watching, and when you're when the conservatives are attacking you, we are a pure science, but then we are having our own party and bonding with ourselves. We are an activist organization. And this, by the way, is something that Christian Smith, in his book, predicted 10 years before, because he said exactly the same thing, that for the outwardly sociology presents itself as this sort of science of social life, but inwardly it pursues this activist, what he called the sacred project of American sociology.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Do you have other thoughts about your? I mean, you're not quite an American.
I am an American.
Oh, are you an American?
I'm a dual citizen.
You're a dual citizen. I still think you have a bit of an outsider's eye, set of eyes on what's happening in the U.S. We've been seeing over the last few months the Trump administration bringing some, I'm not sure what the right phrase is, tough love to universities, or certainly toughness. Whether or not there's any love there, I'm not so sure. What do you think about the prospects for reforming universities, and do governments play a role? You're so active in disciplinary-based reform efforts through HX Sociology and the other work you do. You've seen some successes through professors doing this on their own, starting new journals, for example, or taking over journals, as it were, and supporting new journals. what prospects, and you have an example of the government being affected from your own historical experience. What do you see in this particular moment with your Nordic eyes?
Yeah. So I overall, the simple answer would be that there's no question these problems have been going on for a long time. That's why Heterodox Academy exists. I haven't seen much progress prior to this. In fact, as far as the sort of ideological capture and the sort of things along those lines, the DEI, that has only grown stronger. And I used to teach at Michigan, and the New York Times did a big article about the DEI in Michigan, and my son just graduating from there. So nothing has been happening. So we need a jolt. We need an external. Is the one that the Trump administration is proposing the most sophisticated one? No, but I'm sort of this. I'm been reflecting on this fact that these sort of ideological excesses and whether it's about affirmative action or DEI, or in my area of social science, the biases in social science research or humanities, they are now costing. It seems like they're costing to grant funding related to STEM research and medical sciences and so on. And in some level, this seems like unfair and inappropriate. That why should they suffer? But part of me thinks, and I've been saying this for many years, honestly, when I've been observing this, is like I've been in these DEI kind of conferences and I've been pushing back, and it's the STEM people as well as everybody else who are not caring about these clear violations of academic norms that have been going on. So in some ways, I would say that this is a result of you not protesting, you letting this slide by, and you virtue signaling. So that's where we are. So I have. This is not surprising to me, honestly.
That's fascinating. Any last words you want to give us about sociology and the future for sociology?
Well, I guess my last word would be that if there's a sociologist or a sociology adjacent person listening, please join us. And with Heterodox Academy, you have to also separately join the sociology community, so you'll get to come to our mailing list. So we have a lot of there's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of people who are interested in doing things, and so just join the group.
Jukka, your work for us is really wonderful, and we appreciate and admire so much the way you go about doing it. You have such a good spirit, and yet you're also so principled on these topics, and we just really admire that. Thanks for appearing on Heterodox Out Loud.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Heterodox Out Loud is a nonprofit production of Heterodox Academy. We rely solely on support of listeners like you. If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow our podcast, leave a rating or a review, and share it with your friends and network. Your support helps us reach more individuals who value diverse perspectives in higher education. If you are in higher education, visit heterodoxacademy.org and join the thousands of professors and students from all around the world who are working to support open inquiry. Until next time, I'm Tomasi, reminding you that great minds don't always think alike.